we got the unique opportunity to talk with a neighbor of two of the terrorists.
Yeah.
It doesn't get deeper than that.
Yeah.
He grew up with these guys.
What did you learn?
That every society and every religion and every culture has extremists that will magnify the differences rather than the commonalities and use that to pull people apart and pit them against each other.
Thank you for tuning in to the Mile 40 podcast. I am Bishoy Tadros, the author of Break Barriers and Audacious, both of which are sold on Amazon. And I invite you to join me as I engage with guests to discuss those bounce back moments that we encounter on our personal journey. Mile 40 is a forum to learn about how athletes, professionals, and leaders of all backgrounds stare down moments in life where the only option is to rise up. The Mile 40 podcast strives to remind listeners that the comeback is always greater than the setback. Welcome back to another episode of the Mile 40 podcast. Thank you all for continuing to tune in. I really appreciate all of your support. If you haven't already, please be sure to hit subscribe. If you're listening on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, check out the show notes, pick up a copy of Break Barriers or Audacious. I really love every time I get to send one out, sign it, and get it mailed out for you all. Today's guest is Miles Spencer. He's an entrepreneur, investor, author, artist, and storyteller. But above all, he's a dad. Miles has a knack for turning life's adventures into unforgettable narratives like A Line in the Sand, a gripping tale of friendship, courage, and the messy legacies of colonialisms. We are going to dive into the book today. But as he says, that's just one chapter. He's a seasoned investor. He's hosted his own .com TV show on PBS, financed founders who architected the mobile media landscape, and backed entertainment ventures like Relay to change how we choose digital content, like the dry wit found on his blog, Miles to Go. And I've been following the podcast or the blog, Miles. So I'm excited to ask you a question about that as well. Whether he's leaping from airplanes, diving with sharks, trekking with pals through barren deserts, or coaching his crazy kids, Miles makes life into an adventure, and he invites us to ride along. Thank you for joining me.
My pleasure, for sure. Thank you.
Of course. Like I told you the other day when we were kind of chatting before we got on this episode, this is going to be an episode unlike other episodes. So to the audience out there, brace yourself. This is not, our typical rise and fall story. We're not really going to dig too deep into Miles's childhood. We may ask some questions around, where you grew up just to kind of get to know you a little bit better. But where the thick of this narrative lies is in some of the experience that Miles has chosen to undertake and some of the difficult positions that he has intentionally put himself in after running quite a successful career. So maybe let's kick things off by just kind of diving into where your career kicked off, because obviously you have a lot of great accomplishments, maybe where you went to school and where things started out for you career-wise.
So my career actually did kick off as a result of my schooling and lack thereof. So I'm going to take it back to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where I grew up, played baseball and football. And I was unfortunate enough to have a brother that loved to ski and to convince the family to move to Stowe, Vermont, and I didn't want to go. It's too damn cold. So I started applying out to boarding schools so that I could play football. And I had a epically terrible interview at one boarding school in Connecticut. And the interviewers kind of looked at me and said, like, dude, anything else? And I said, yeah, I really just came here to play football. And he said, oh, football coach works in admissions. Coach came down. His name is Coach James. Looked, no highlight rules back then, no NIL, no nothing. He said, it says you're from Vermont. I said, no, not really. I'm from Beaver, Pennsylvania. And the coach said, oh, Pat Tarquinio's program? And a light bulb went off. And I said, this guy knows the coach in Beaver, who is an epic legend, and I played under him. And I said, absolutely. He's my mentor. And more or less, story keeps getting better as I age, but I think the corner of the application was torn off, and I got a note in the mail the day after I returned home that said, when you came to interview, there were only 2 seats left in a class of 330. Now there's 1. See you in September,
Huh.
Coach James.
Huh.
So I got to go to a wonderful boarding school in Connecticut, met people from all over the world, heard languages from all over the world, saw religions from all over the world. And it was kind of my first jump into what can seem like hyperspace from coming from Beaver, Pennsylvania. Beaver, by the way, is basically the setting for the deer hunter. Okay, like that's the life we grew up in. And all of a sudden, I'm at a boarding school in Connecticut. I went to college in Virginia, and after my freshman year, my father became very, very ill with a rare blood disease. I came home to help him out. He was a life insurance salesman. He sold keyman life insurance policies to entrepreneurs that just got financing or people that had just done acquisitions. So I had this whole stack of deals that were undone, right? And I said, can I just work on one of these over the summer as like summer project before I go back to school? Sure. I bought a company when I was 19.
Okay.
With a bunch of credit card debt from my friends. And we exported and distributed automotive parts and tools. The problem was we exported them to Iraq, Lebanon, and South America. Now, the good news was it was a confirmed irrevocable letter of credit, which I discovered. I just taken a class on that. It's a totally financeable piece of paper. So I financed like 98% of the deal, did the rest in credit cards, and I was running a company when I was 19 years old. Based on the customers and the regions that I just detailed, you can imagine that thing did not last forever. But I got to the end of it and I decided probably that's what I wanted to learn to do in school. So I've already done that. And I joined an investment banking firm, which led me to being a small principal in a VC fund during .com, which led me to create Money Hunt, which is the TV show, which ended up on PBS, which was just a marketing gimmick and is often called the grandfather of Shark Tank. But I ripped it off from somebody that I used to watch in France named Bernard Tapie.
So was that like in the 90s?
That was 1981. Okay. I'm an exchange student from, the television show is called The Entrepreneurs, hosted by Bernard Tapie, and that's in the early 80s. You can look up Tapie. You can look him up on my blog. He is quite the delightful scoundrel. He's passed away now. But that was the idea. And so when I'm sitting with my VC friends, I said, like, how are we going to get any deals in here? Everybody else has 100 million. It's .com. Everybody's got a brand. And we only have like $4 million from 4 investors. So like, we're going to have to do like smaller deals.
Yeah.
And how are we going to get them in the house? And I said, like, well, there's a show that I used to watch. Plus there's like Wayne's World. We could do it at Cable Vision up in Connecticut for $500. And that's how we started. The tape got into the hands of the guy that ran Warner Brothers Television Syndication, who's now a very good friend, Scott Carlin. And he basically brought me out there and sat me down in the commissary of Warner Brothers. I was like starstruck looking around, like, wow. He wrote down on the back of a napkin, here's how to do it and own it. And so that's what we did. We ended up with great distribution, but it was all about the deal flow. And the fund did spectacularly well during .com. And that's my story up to now.
So now I have to, I mean, I didn't think I was going to go here now, but look, it takes a certain kind of individual to do what you did, to buy a company off credit cards at the age of 19, to do business in a country like Iraq. Like, like that takes a specific kind of individual. So as much as I didn't think we're going to go here, now I need to ask, tell me a little bit about your upbringing and, who potentially influenced you to, make gunslinging decisions like that?
Well, I'm going to start with this. Gunslinging is a optical illusion, especially when it comes to entrepreneurship. Yep. Most entrepreneurs really consider a lot of risks and mitigate those risks and then take those risks and either gain the rewards or don't. So that's my comment on gunslinging. I grew up in Beaver, Pennsylvania, 25 miles north of Pittsburgh. It's where at
Yeah.
Butler, PA, where there was some shooting going on during the election. That's literally 5 miles away from where I grew up.
Okay.
And again, you want to watch, you want to know all about my neighborhood. Watch Flashdance, Deer Hunter, and All the Right Moves. You got it. That's basically where I grew up. You're going to work in the steel mill, or you're going to play ball for either Pitt, Penn State, or if you're lucky, Ohio State these days.
Go
That was my
Buckeyes.
that was my destiny. My heroes within my family. I was named after my great grandfather. You didn't know we were going here either. His name was Miles Sharpless Spencer, and he lived in central Pennsylvania. He had 24 kids. He had his last kid when he was 74.
Okay. Wow.
So I had my first kid when I was 50. So he's my hero. I still got 22 to go, and I probably got 15 more years of that possibility. I doubt it'll happen. My grandfather was the 23rd of 24 kids. When he was 4 years old, my great grandfather passed away, and so he was more or less out on his own, and went down to the recruiting station. World War I when he was 15. They said, like, you're 15. We can't even fake this, right? It's like ridiculous. And he brought his 22 to the recruiting station, and it's debated whether it was out the window or from the porch, but shot the head off of a squirrel on a telephone line with a 22. And they said, you're a sniper. We're sending you to France. You're off to the races. Let's go. So Grandpa Herbert Sharpless Spencer got to see France somewhat differently than I got to see France, with a backpack and a rifle on his back. It wasn't a 22. I'll assure you with that. He when it comes to grit, he's my hero. His one leg was shut off, and the other had 5 8 caliber wounds to above the knee. He applied his own tourniquet. He got 2 fence posts. He walked somewhere between a quarter and 1.25 miles to a military hospital in Semi-Heal. But on his way, he stopped at a French cottage, knocked on the door for some assistance. She only spoke French. He spoke none. She slammed the door. That's why I learned French. And he got back to Fort Lee, New Jersey, and a beautiful woman nursed him back to health. I know this because she is my grandmother, and she was his nurse. And so they only had 12 kids, including my father. So that is a little bit of the background of the grit, the scale. Perhaps the curiosity is one trait that I often highlight from there. I was always about who, what, why, where, when.
What about your father?
And oh yeah, Dad was the 11th of 12 kids. Yes, 10 sisters. So between, talk about 24 kids, 12 kids, etc. We go to a family reunion on the border of Ohio and Pennsylvania. We can pretty much elect the sheriff. I mean, if anybody named Spencer that comes to the reunion can be the sheriff for the next year because it's that big, right? Dad grew up in a household that had a lot of kids around, basically a farm. When he announced to his dad, Herbert, that he wanted to go away to college to play football and was recruited by Mount Union College, which is a D3 powerhouse. My grandfather said, like, what are you wasting your time with that for? You can fix cars up and sell them all day long and make a lot more money than going to college. Well, he did very well at Mount Union. He also met my mother, Nancy Lou, and they were homecoming queen and football captain, got married, had 4 kids. And Dad became, as I mentioned before, the New York Life insurance salesman in both Pittsburgh and Cleveland. So
where were you in the order of the 4 kids?
I was 3rd of 4. I have an older brother, an older and younger sister.
Got it. I mean, look, you've had a lot of influences. I mean, I'm not kidding. I'm like losing count of all the family members you must have had. Did anyone in particular play a role in influencing entrepreneurship?
Well, my father certainly was a bit of an entrepreneur. Besides being a salesman for New York
Sure.
Life, he had a restaurant which I worked in from the time I was 8 years old. I was doing dishes. I am the best. Just don't tell anybody. I'm probably the best, fastest, most effective dishwasher I have met in my life. And so sometimes someone else is doing the dishes. I just step away, just bust the table. I'll take it out. And yeah, I haven't really monetized that skill well yet, but people do appreciate it eventually. I get you don't have to do that, which is like passive aggressive for like, don't, I don't want to give you too much credit, but I don't want to do this. So I'm glad you're doing this. So, you don't have to do that. Like, yeah, I know I don't, but it's much better if I do. So we're done. Um, got a little bit of entrepreneurship in him. I'm going to say yes. The rest of the family is mostly coal miners, truck drivers, and snipers.
Why not go down that route?
I could get in the end zone with great frequency and rarely drop the ball.
Was there ever any consideration of going pro?
By me, yes.
Yeah.
By any of the pro or college teams, not so much.
No. Okay. All right. So when did football end for you? College?
Football ended on a punt return in the seventh game of the season in Lexington, Virginia, where my good friend and eventual team captain and All-American Gene Gerard announced that he could return punts, and so it was a two-back formation, returning punts. It's kind of rare, and so whoever doesn't get the ball takes out the gunner, the fast guy. And we get back, and Gene says to me, "This one's yours." I say, "Well, the ball's not in the air. How do you know?" He said, "I've never returned a punt. I just wanted to see what it was like." So, Gene, don't miss the gunners. Fine. So I did catch the ball cleanly. The gunner was missed. I woke up Sunday with I think like fourth of my six concussions. So yeah, back then it's like, oh, you could play next Saturday, right? But I've come to realize that there's probably some Swiss cheese in my brain, and that may do me in.
Your
So
memory is pretty sharp.
at the moment, well, how do you know? Like none of
I,
these things are actually
I mean,
none of these things are actually verifiable. The
you
stories just keep
exactly.
getting better.
You could be making all this up, and that's fair. Also, a disclaimer for the audience: he could be making every bit of this up. But I did notice in the way that you answer, a little observation was how you looked up. It almost made me want to ask you if you have photographic memory. The way that you were reliving that punt return. So that was something I observed and I noticed. So one thing I'm picking up on early on, Miles, is the fact that this could easily be a long form 3-hour conversation, just based on how much you have to offer in terms of insight and what you've learned from your upbringing, not just from a personal perspective, but a professional perspective as well. So I want to make sure that I keep us on track. Let's bring us back to the 90s now. And let's talk about how things shaped up during the dot-com era ultimately, where things maybe then kind of took a transition for you, and what led to that transition.
Well, the 90s arrived, and I was always sort of an early adopter on technology, right? Like I had the first Apple IIe, and I had a cool dot matrix printer, and I could print a brochure for the golf tournament, like using Paper Direct paper, which ended up being my partners in Capital Express, the VC fund. So I felt I was always on that inquisitive, curious edge of applicable technology that made humanity a little bit better. Um, these four guys had just sold a business. Three of them had just sold a business, and they pretty much had the same outlook as I did. It seemed as if this World Wide Web was going to be a big deal. We ought to try to finance the picks and shovels. We thought we'd have $100 million. We failed to raise any money. So we just had like the partners capital, which in the end is much better because if it works, you don't share it with anybody. And if it doesn't, you lose it all. So these guys were gunners. And as things go, we did 10 $500,000 deals, but one of them was register.com. Register.com broke the domain name registration business previously held by Network Solutions back in the day, because Icon, which is controlled by Congress, said, like, you should do it. And no one knew what it was at the time. So it's like, all right, Network Solutions doing it. And I can remember, photographic or not, that we're at the Javits Center, and there's like a .com show, and Register originally just did homepage creation software, which was really cool for a nanosecond. I walked down the hall at the Javits Center and I counted 40 other homepage creation software businesses. I said, I bought a pizza and a case of beer, and I went back to the booth and I said, guys, we're so screwed. Let's talk about what else, we could possibly do with this. So like, what do you do? What do you do? What do you do? What do you do? Like, what happens after you create a homepage? Well, they got to get a domain name. Oh yeah, who's got those? Like, Network Solutions. Like, what do you make on it? It's like, we just make like commission because they got the. It's like, why do they have it? And Richard Foreman, the CEO at the time of the company, wrote to Congress and said, come on. And they invited him down. He testified. They gave him, Icon gave register.com the number 2 slot. And so they had a co-exclusive with Network Solutions for 6 months. And then Yahoo and Bing, everybody else came in after that. But that was designed as the reward for breaking the monopoly and bringing it to their attention. And Deutsche Bank thought that was worth $1.4 billion. Turns out the public market thought it was worth $4.1 billion. We had invested $500,000 for at $1.5 million valuation.
Wow. So, and this is, I mean, I was born in '87, so I was pretty young during that period. And you brought up the domains. This is like pre GoDaddy.
Pre-Danica Patrick, GoDaddy, like I wonder what we're really selling here, which kind of goes to like, there's nothing special about domain name registration, period, right? It's like good service, don't screw it up, and you got it forever. And so, GoDaddy probably recognized that. It's like, get them in the house, we'll figure it out later. But yes, this was long before GoDaddy.
Wow. This is really interesting to hear. I mean, especially given where we are now in the age of digital transformation, to think about the beginning and you kind of being front and center for it. That's really, really, really cool.
I feel so, Bishoy, I feel so fortunate. I tell my kids when they'll listen, look, I would pick up a ringing phone and announce, this is Miles Spencer, the Spencer residence. Who may I help you? Who would you like to speak to?
I do remember the answering machine.
Right? That's how. Well, before the answering machine, there was me.
Yeah.
So I lived in that world. I lived, .com. I consider to be sea change. Mobile, I consider to be sea change, and AI/blockchain right now. So I have experienced 3 massive step changes in technology and how they help humanity if they're used right. But I used to dial a rotary phone, and we were on a party line in Vermont. It's like, hey, hang up! Like, this one's for me. Like, well, yeah.
I do remember rotary phones. So but yeah, no, it's how old are your kids?
Currently 13 and 11. They think they're 17 and 21.
Wow. So they literally have no idea.
Oh, they were iPad babies.
Yeah. Right. So they've never seen a VCR, never seen.
No. My son's old school, so he's got a phonograph record and he spins LPs. But that's just to be cool. That's not necessarily because that's the way to go. But as a parent, I think we have very unique challenges parenting kids that have only known these dopamine machines, right? That's a tough, it's a tough do for parents.
Any
Um,
guidance you want to give the parents listening to this show, myself included?
yeah, flip phones until they're 15.
Fair enough.
Full
There,
stop.
you heard it here first, folks. No,
And I sell dopamine for a living.
yeah,
And I'm telling you, I mean, you go out to Silicon Valley, like all the tech execs, it's flip phones for the kids till their frontal lobes have developed. So it's kind of weird that the dopamine that we've been selling and the eyeballs that we've been trading are run by people that don't give their kids the same thing.
yeah, yeah. No, that's great insight, and it makes perfect sense. And look, we're hearing it to your point from someone who's been across all three factions of this, just wide ranging evolution in technology. And I can't even imagine, and I don't know if you even want to go there. What like 10 year where this is going to be in 10 years from now. Um,
Um, I am imagining that. And I'll give you one teaser of something that I'm probably going to back and work on. Because of what we have today, we've talked a lot about family and heritage and legacy and etc. I fully expect to have either text to text, voice to voice, video to video, like we're doing right now, or a tabletop action figure of my great grandfather available to answer questions from his great great grandchildren in his voice with his image. Uh, you know, everybody buys life insurance. I think we're going to be buying legacy insurance here soon.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting call out and definitely something for us to think about. Man, Miles, that you're kind of as a host. It's like, what do I ask? What do I ask him next? Uh, but again, keeping in track. Let's go back here. Let's go to the .com crash. How did that impact you?
Um, you know, we did very well. The company we've been talking about was register.com. They got public in January, February of that year. Midnight at the Oasis was August, really, the .com crash. And by that time, we had straddled things, collared things, liquidated things to the point where we didn't get caught holding the bag with a bunch of public equity that was valueless. So our partners did very well. I think I was a small partner, please note, but doing well for others and having them recognize that did very well for me going forward.
Yeah, yeah, no, for sure. I mean, you were you were in the right place, for sure. And that's important to kind of reflect on. So .com crash happens, and now we're approaching the 9/11 era. Talk to me about that.
Well, certainly there was a funk in Metro New York for quite a while. Loss of life was tangible in my neighborhood. You can see the Twin Towers from the water. Um,
So you were in New
and
York at the time?
I lived in Connecticut,
Okay.
but
Yeah. Yeah.
you got a straight shot down Long Island Sound
Yes.
to the Twin Towers and the Verrazano Bridge, and you
Yep.
can make out a couple others, and so it's kind of tangible in
Absolutely.
that regard. I can remember what I was doing, as many people can. I had some harrowing close friends that had close experiences, but none the past. And then next level and next level, we all know, 25 people that passed then. Career wise, it was time for a little bit of break and reassessment. And I started doing investments for my own account. And these same partners from .com started coming back to me. So in that regard, my my focus was on technology, investing in technology that made humanity a little bit better, and that could go from great rollerblade wheels to better .com domain services, etc. But on a personal level, my curiosity just was not satisfied. by the explanations I was getting of who, what, why, where, when. I'm not really a conspiracy theorist, but couldn't really imagine that everyone in the region we're just going to generally call the Middle East was a bad guy that wanted to make a mark and, frankly, a giant recruiting poster for extreme Islam. And no matter what I read, no matter what I listened to, it's always kind of like,
A tilt.
yeah, not enough until I got to a book called Seven Pillars of Wisdom by T.E. Lawrence. Now, T.E. Lawrence, Lawrence of Arabia, was an interesting cat, educated at Oxford, archaeologist, map maker, but was being run by what's probably a spy master named Hogarth out of the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford. And he started showing up in the Middle East, right? Now, this guy, short, blonde, blue-eyed, does not fit the part. Yet he learns the languages, he learns the customs, he certainly knew the geography, and there was a war coming. Sure enough, when that war came, they appointed him eventually to convince the desperate Bedouin Arabic tribes to unite temporarily to unseat the Ottoman Turks, which controlled the area. And of course, you got the Suez Canal, which the British are pretty interested in as well. Then, so Lawrence, 27 articles was the first published work. Seven Pillars of Wisdom is absolutely brilliant, and it details basically the Arab revolt from Jeddah, Saudi Arabia to Damascus, Syria. If you're not familiar with it, audience, look it up. It's worth it. Just read the book. His understanding of, I'm going to just say, the Bedouin, right, which is kind of like a pan-Arabic term for me. I'm sorry if that's a miss, but that's kind of where I land. Was very unique, and his ability to express that to the West, together with a guy by the name of Lowell Thomas, who's an American videographer who helped promote his story. It's really the first guy in 100 years that not only understood the Bedouin, communicated it to the West, but nailed the prophecy. We can't, as the Westerners, just draw lines in the sand and expect these people to just say, like, okay, I guess I'm on this team now. And I've just lost that well we've had for 500 years in the family because it's now on the other side, right? It's going to cause heartache. Then you add a little bit of disparate religions and immigration, and you add a little bit of petroleum reserves, and it starts to get pretty hot. But he nailed it.
Quick personal question. We did not dive as deep as, perhaps we could have on everything that happened before, you started going down this pathway of exploration. But was this like you to explore something like this? Because it seems like for the previous 10 years, based on the little we've picked up on this podcast, that career was really driving a lot. And, let us in a little bit. Were you one to, necessarily dip into these type of geopolitical subjects previously, or was something about 9/11 so close to home, that it kind of changed and made you, a little bit more proactive?
Well, always a curious mind.
Mm.
Um, I had an interesting superpower I didn't know I had, and that was no kids until I was 50. So
Were you married? Were you married
true.
at this point?
I was,
Okay.
yes, I was. But I just, I have a lot of extra time.
Okay.
So I applied myself to, as it were, beach volleyball.
Sure.
And so got to play at, more or less the East Coast tournament level. There's an asterisk there. That ain't West
Sure.
Coast tournament level. That's East Coast tournament level for 8 or 10 years. And that was wonderful physically, wonderfully mentally, and great, great athletic competition that was a little more active than golf. I was a scuba diver and had the benefit of being able to scuba dive all over the world and see some harrowing, funky things below the surface. And I've always had an interest, probably through my father, of history, especially related to military history. Um, so between the three and the curiosity from 9/11 and a man by the name of Wells Jones, who I knew from church, it's true, who came through town and was also a fan of T.E. Lawrence, is like, wow, what do we do now? And the answer was go.
Mm. And that's where the mic drop happens because I had asked you about this, when we caught up last time. A lot of people thought what you were thinking, but a lot of people also just accepted the narrative for what it was because no one really has the time to just drop everything and go. And I think the expectation was, there's a whole slew of officials who are designated to figure this out more so than we are, as amateurs essentially. But it takes, again, a certain kind of person to do that. I mean, I'll call it for what it is. We've had a lot of guests on this show. That might have been one of the ballsiest things I've ever heard of, to be honest. I can't even think, as I think about some of the crazy things that we've had on the show, I can't think of anything that must have taken more courage than that. And you talked earlier about measuring risk. As an entrepreneur, talk to me a little bit about some of the risk measurement that went into deciding to go.
So, first of all, your comment about amateur is absolutely correct. But amateur actually is based in amore, is love. And it's actually loving to pursue these things. So that's, amateurs get a hard knock, but amateurs are really all about love. Um, oh, the pen came out. I was going to make a note. Oh, no, it's just water. Okay. Um, the, uh, the, the impetus, like, I need to collect my thoughts for a second. If you edit, we'll give this pause. Because I hit amateur hard, I lost my train of thought of what I was really going to say. So can you ask the question again, and
Yeah,
we'll roll from there, or just pick up amateur? And we'll
no, the question is, it takes a certain kind of person, you know, post 9/11, even if you're doing your research and trying to figure out how, what, why would this happen, right? And so close to home. And, the news is reporting X, Y, and Z. And, people from the Middle East must all be bad because they all must believe this, especially people, with Islamic beliefs in particular. you know, we all heard the same news. We all had our own biases. We all had our own influences. And I really do believe that, uh, like we all had our own individual influences, even outside of the news. Take it from someone myself who was born in the Middle East, who then moved to New York, who grew up in a relatively conservative community in New York. Like, and so we all had our own different biases at the time, but none of us really decided we were going to act on them. And if we were, I think our actions were rooted in helping our neighbor, in being there for each other, in expressing pride for our country. But like I said, none of us had the cojones to actually get on a flight and go to the Middle East. So talk to me a little bit about that.
Right. Um, I think the beginning was the curiosity, as we've talked about before, right? Cojones, probably. I'll say another C, which is courage to pursue your curiosity, right? And to have adventures that actually give you understanding. But we talked about, or part of your question was about risk and risk mitigation. So my partner, co-author Wells Jones. Now Navy X parachute rescue specialist, Antarctica. Right. So he jumps out of the back of C-120 aircraft and does halo jumps onto ice floes and clips somebody on and says, let's get out of here. Right? That's like his daily bread. So I was like, and he's a T.E. Lawrence fan. So let's get serious
He's not
about
scared.
no, concerned, not scared. I generally get into trouble and he generally gets us out. So we prepared for 6 months for this trip. We trained with a SAS security professional who, prior to us, was assigned to the royal family. And we learned about uh, kidnap and ransom, evasion, avoidance, um, uh, just what's on your person, what you cover, what you carry. And I'll give you a couple of rules that Jamie gave to us. One was if you approach a border and there are an inordinate amount of men not in uniform, turn around, right? The second is gear up so that you have what you need, but you get rid of what you have every day. So, for an example, we each had PLBs strapped to our crotch, our underwear. It just looks like a scene from Spinal Tap, right? Like but a PLB looks like a cucumber, right? But it sends a signal to the satellite, which actually triggered our kidnap and ransom policy, so that we had an extraction contract. If we got pinched or rolled up, within 15 minutes, if they didn't hear from us, they would launch. So we had that all the time,
Wait,
right?
what does PLB stand for?
Personal locator beacon.
Got it. Wow.
So basically, so from your crotch to the satellite down to the kidnap and ransom policy in Pittsburgh, right? We had a BGAN transmitter. Looks like a laptop computer, but it has no keys on it, which really freaked out the people at the border. It's like, what is this, right? It basically sent digital signals to the satellite because we had a tough book, which is somewhat military and law enforcement, but we would blog on it. And we'd write every day, make notes every day, take pictures every day, and load it to the cloud, and then delete everything. So each morning when we got up, if we got rolled up, it's like, that's what we got. No pictures, no nothing, right? Blank. And the last thing in our kit, and we both just went with Osprey pack, one carry on, one pack for the whole trip. We had a solar panel that basically was as big as a dining room table, but it folded up into a napkin in your pocket. But wow, when you opened it up, it gave quite a flare. And so we were really popular at crossings. But that was our kit, and our guides, by the way, all named Ali, right? Like every time, like, what's your name? Never mind, it's Ali. I knew it. Um, they would always drop us off at the border, and we'd walk up to the border, and they had no contact with the people on the other side that were picking us up. We just refused to be sold down the river. Right.
Two quick questions for you.
Sure.
Number one, when you think about the resources that you had mentioned before, the security training in particular, the PLBs, right? Like, was that through Wells? Did Wells have the access to that, or was that through your network? At the end of the day, like, if any of us want to do that, we don't know who to call. So, how did you?
Well, we didn't have ChatGPT to pull together our kit like
Yeah,
we might have today.
yeah,
But Wells had a background in
yeah.
some of that stuff. I'm a technology guy, so I had the rest of it. And this guy Jamie made some recommendations as well, including the KNR policy.
Wow. Okay. And then my other question to you is, you were married. How'd you explain this to your wife?
I'd like to do this. Um, if not now, when? and the life insurance policy is tied to the K&R policy, and you're the beneficiary. Any questions?
Love that.
It's just like she said, double the payout, and we're good.
I love that. Fair enough. All right. That's good. And I appreciate the brevity of the answers there. All right. So now, where are we flying to first?
In real life, we fly in Amman. I did not have a visa for Saudi Arabia for either of us. We had 2/3 of the trip planned, but we landed in Amman with nothing. But remember, I had the show, and with the show came a book. HarperCollins published a book of the same name, and somehow the book got into the hands of YPO, Young Presidents Organization, in Riyadh, and I finagled an invitation for me to come speak. Not a lot of book tours in Riyadh in 2006, but I got the invite. Wells came with me as my security officer. Like Saudi's like, yeah, sure, he's got a security officer, and so we were in. Book presentation went pretty well, and they said, like, really cool. What else can we help you with? Right inside the tent in Saudi, it's a good place to be. And I go, oh, well, we'd like to trek 1,000 miles from the Jeddah, Saudi Arabia to Damascus, Syria, if that's okay. And I go, like, how can we help? And away we went. That's how we got in.
That's amazing.
The first time. We were back 25 times after that, but that was the first
one. Was there any sort of hesitancy on your side? Look, at the end of the day, like, it was also an interesting time to be working with Saudi officials, right?
We were advised that if you got questioned or detained, the likelihood that you disappeared was great. It just was, too much paperwork to make it otherwise.
Yeah.
And so that was on our minds.
Yep.
Always.
Yeah.
It actually is one of my one of the notches in the stock of my personal achievement gun is I've been arrested, detained, and interrogated in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, and some other places. But that was a doozy. So yeah, we made great pains not to go away. And one of the ways to do that is to get the blessing of someone up high, which we did relatively soon. And he basically gave us free passage on our trip. And once in a while, I'd call his chief of staff when I was in a tight situation, even at 3:00 in the morning. But during Ramadan, it's like midday. And whatever guard was questioning me at the time saw who was coming up on the screen and said, like, you may go.
Hey all, it's me, Bishoy. As a marathon runner and endurance athlete, I've come to understand the importance of properly fueling your body for preparation and recovery. Every day, you get a shot at success. How you start your day typically paints a picture of what the rest of the day will look like. Start your day with a super convenient, healthy, and delicious nutritional win. Meal 1 by Creatures of Habit. Overnight oatmeal packed with 30 grams of plant-based protein, chia, flax, and pumpkin seeds. Vitamin D3, omega-3s, a probiotic, and digestive enzymes made in under 1 minute. Stop wasting time or worrying about what to eat as your first meal of the day. Start with Meal 1. Visit creaturesofhabit.com, creatures spelled with a K, and use code MILE40 for 15% off a one-time purchase or the first subscription order payment. That's spectacular for so many different reasons. I think about people who struggle to get in front of decision makers for interviews, and somehow you got in front of, the highest authority in a country that, the majority of us have very little access to. And so that says a lot about, your capability as an individual, and how you navigate social settings. And so we could probably do a whole episode on that in terms of like picking up on the skill set it takes to accomplish something like that. when you reflect
May,
on,
may I make a point on? May I make a point on that point?
yeah,
It's important to note that the people that we did meet there had a vested interest in making a good impression of one of the few Americans that had had the cojones, using your word, um, to show up there after 9/11. So
there had to have been some
it's
skepticism, though, right? You could have
ours
eaten
or theirs,
what's that from them,
ours or theirs.
from them.
Well, less in Saudi than in Syria,
Yeah,
Damascus, and even less in the border crossing into Israel, which is the King Hussein Bridge. What are you doing here? Always had different intonations. But one thing that Prince Khalid Al Faisal said to us the first time we went to a majlis, he invited us to a majlis, and I'm like, got the whole, and they spoke English for our benefit. It was like 50 sheikhs that just returned from Mecca on Hajj. And uh, in between that and dinner, he went to pray in his personal mosque, and he met us in the veranda on his way. And he said, please come to dinner. Well, that's good. Uh, and you will see, we are not all terrorists. That was it. But it said a lot about what we felt. Um, a lot of Saudis wanted to restore faith amongst Americans, and here are these two that have just shown up.
absolutely. And it just kind of makes my mind think about everything that's happened since. Um, I want to ask you, when you think about the early days of the journey, what were some key mistakes that you guys made? Think of one or two that really stand out.
I can still think of several that really stand out, but I would say that my propensity to take photographs, like I do no paper, right? So photos are my record keeping. Maybe that's my photographic memory. So we're rolling up the Hakal, which is the border town between the Jordanian and Saudi border. And we're about to get out of the transport car to walk up. So I explained why we were always walk ups. And a cargo van goes by slowly. You see a lot of those. No branding, no marking. And we see a Abrams tank train its turret and then gun on that, and it followed it to our car. So we're literally staring down the barrel of a tank gun on our first crossing. So I took a picture.
Yeah. Naturally.
And it's in the podcast resource page, so you can get that picture and use it if you like to. So, picture there was probably ill-advised, but no one noticed, and they passed. But Wells noticed. He said, "You ever do that again? I'll never let you do that again." That was one mistake. The second mistake was more existential. We get to a place called Maghar al Sheib, which is in the northwest corner of Saudi Arabia, not too far from Jordan, not too far from Israel. Matter of fact, as the crow flies. And our guide, his name is Ali, different guy. He's going on, accent's not great, archaeological dig, this, Haya, Ezra, Abraham, Musa. Like, look, I grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I'm a Christian. I'm now kind of accepting the fact that there are other religions in the world. But these names I know, they're from the Bible and they're from the Old Testament. So where are you getting these names? He said, they're in the Quran. It's like, same prophets? Yeah. Same stories? Yeah. So we call my friend in Jerusalem Like, I'm going to name you 12 prophets I just heard. You tell me if they're in the Torah. We went 12 for 12. And at that moment, I realized the depth and breadth of my ignorance, having grown up in Christianity and figured that was the one, everyone else was the other. And here, these prophets and these stories that all come from this same desert are used by three different religions, and the commonalities are so much greater than the differences.
Did you do any homework on Islam before doing this trip?
I read the Quran.
Okay. So you read the Quran. Did you learn any Arabic?
We did.
Were you comfortable communicating, or was communication?
We generally surprised people with a few phrases they weren't expecting. We sometimes understood conversations that they did not think we were understanding and would inject a clarifying question in the middle of it. So, just enough to keep them on their toes and for us to get our meals served and directions to the bathroom.
Got it. Got it. Okay, cool. Um, wow. In total, I know you mentioned this earlier. In total, how many days was the journey the first time?
26.
26 days. Did you have it mapped out geographically before going, through?
Well, aside from that small detail of
Yeah.
not having a visa to Saudi until we did,
Yeah.
yes, the map is T.E. Lawrence, Seven Pillars of Wisdom, and the Arab Revolt's journey from Jeddah through Yenbo, Wej, Aqaba, Wadi Rum, Karak, Dara, Damascus. His favorite castle is Krak Chevalier, that's up in Homs. And then retracing our steps and back to Jerusalem. So it is pretty darn close to the route he took. He went back to Cairo after the Battle of Aqaba. We didn't. He rode a camel. We didn't. Yeah, so that was the route.
Outside of the representatives and the dignitaries and the statesmen who obviously had a little bit more stake in protecting the reputation of their region, did you come across any haters, if you will, people who, um, you know, basically gave you you deserved it?
Answer no, but then again, why would they show themselves? But we did have um, some that look. We one of our guides, his name was Ali, was family, friends, and neighbors with the two brothers that were part of the crew that hit the North Tower. Right? I don't want to say that. I'm not going to say the name because I'll get it wrong. Wells has more information on that one, but I do recall the ride, and I do recall him breaking down in tears of embarrassment and shame that his neighbors, countrymen, fellow Muslims had done this, and they were happy to have the chance to say, "I am sorry" in person. So that kind of was consistent from the top of the food chain all the way down to Ali in the desert.
That's a really powerful um, recollection. I even kind of hearing you just share that, it definitely sent a little bit of a shiver because, outside of this conversation, I don't think something like that's ever been shared before. Um, and so, it's not going to undo a lot of the damage that's been done, but it definitely lets us in on the humanity that exists in an area that was written off heavily, um, because we felt, as U.S. citizens, and especially, look, I'm a New Yorker. I felt like they're all bad guys. They have to be. There's no other way. Um, I don't want to skip steps. I want to make sure you tell me if I'm missing anything, but I remember you telling me about the interesting exchange that you had at the Israeli border. But before we get there, did anything take place that's, important for us to make note of? I know, people listen, pick up the book to the audience out there and you're going to read it more in depth. And to you, Miles, I'm going to ask, if there's an abridged or I don't want to cut it short, but any specific highlight you want to call out before we get to the Israeli border.
Um, you've mentioned that this is not going to be a 3-hour show, at least not this time. I mean, um, okay, I'll give you one. Fuddruckers.
What's that?
Exactly. So we're in Saudi. Our guide's name is Osama. And literally, every time he introduced himself, he would say, "Do not be afraid." And we came to love Osama. Osama was our original fixer in town, and he introduced us up the chain, and he got to come with us and meet princes that he had never met because we were, in a way, his prize, and he had delivered us up the food chain. And so he went along for the ride. So he's like, "Can we do Mecca?" He's like, "Yeah, do Mecca." It's like, "All right, we'll go to Taif, which is Mecca's on the way, and you could like see it from the highway." Like, so, and we're rolling along like 165 miles an hour in this pickup truck, and we stopped for gas. And one thing I noticed is like the dial's not really spinning. Like the gallons are going up. So he fills his truck for like 65 cents. I'm like, "Oh, you guys must have a lot of oil around here." And we are having this conversation. He goes like, "You got to clue me in on something." I'm like, "What?" And at this station, it's like, "What's a Fuddrucker?" I'm like, "Oh no." It's just like, "I see these signs everywhere. I know they're from America. What's a Fuddrucker?" I was like, "It's a burger." We go in and have a Fuddruckers burger with all the fixings, fries, and a shake. And like between the six of us, we can only like have 2 meals because it's just crazy calories. And what we found to be interesting was when you look at the menu, and then I looked up the menu in Houston, Texas, where Fuddruckers comes from. I'm sure they're dudes at Fuddruckers in Houston knocking down 2, 3, 4,000 calories at a lunch, no problem, right?
Yeah.
Having their Fuddruckers. And we can barely finish a half, right? Which goes to Americans' consumption issues, not just Fuddruckers, but gas as well, right? But he's like, "I'm a Fuddrucker. You're a Fuddrucker. She's a Fuddrucker." Whatever. Like, it was a moment of not just comedic um, joy, but it was Osama relating to an American tradition, hanging out with Americans, having an American meal, and he was just beyond himself. Uh, so that was probably not the one I originally thought of when you said an interesting tidbit. It wasn't harrowing.
Well, no,
It
but
was
it
beautiful.
it tells us about, the ups and downs of this very unpredictable journey, I'm sure. You bring up Osama, and I'm gonna ask the question just so the audience has the context. Were there any questions that were perhaps off limits for you guys while you were there? I'm sure there were some things you had to restrict yourself in certain ways. Like for instance, could you dig into bin Laden and his history in Saudi Arabia? Could you ask about Al Qaeda? And did you? And what kind of answers did you receive at the time?
Certainly bin Laden, because half of the palaces we visited were built by the
Bin Laden
construction
construction
company
company. Yeah.
of the same name,
Yep.
right? Um, you know, Al Qaeda at the time wasn't a well formed brand.
Yep.
So um, we we got the unique opportunity to talk with a neighbor of two of the terrorists.
Yeah.
It doesn't get deeper than that.
Yeah.
He grew up with these guys.
What did you learn?
That every society and every religion and every culture has extremists that will magnify the differences rather than the commonalities that I discussed in Matter al Shea, and use that to pull people apart and pit them against each other.
Yeah. But I can't believe I just, as you say that, I have to think that was a long conversation. That was a quick summary of a very long conversation.
That was a couple of days.
Yeah, that wasn't a quick conversation, I'm sure. And I can only imagine the back and forth, as you tried to pull out more information, and better understand. Okay, so now bring us back to the Israeli border. Where was that in the timeline of things? Was that toward the end?
This is like day 24, 25.
Okay.
We were exhausted.
Okay.
Even though we had prepped and we were on top of our game, and we had been running on adrenaline for 3+ weeks. We were probably running out of patience. And, Wells and I sort of take turns getting roughed up at borders, right? Like, I don't know why, but they just pick one or they pick the other. Right? And in this particular case, I came through and I'm next to Wells because they ask questions to get just you kind of uh, Israeli security standard operating procedure, which is they ask questions together.
Was this the IDF?
Yeah. And then they separate the two and compare all three sets of answers. Right. We were onto that. But in this particular case, after about a minute of questions, they put me in a more or less of a VIP waiting room, and I had a Coca-Cola. I remember, I was like, "Can I get?" I like my ice. I like ice with my soda. It's like, "Can I get some ice cubes with this?" Someone scurrying off looking for ice cubes, and I'm watching an EPL football match. I didn't put my feet up, but just about should. I think it was a lazy boy chair, and I was like, "This
It's not so bad.
is not so bad."
Yeah.
I look out the window, and Wells is just getting it. We happen to have arrived on a bus with a group of other Palestinians. He happened to be sitting next to a Palestinian woman. And she seemed to be a person of interest, which everybody is. She's a student. And Wells suffered from proximity. So he went through it all. So here's the thing, and we even got the Saudis. We even got the most IDF on this one. So our backpacks were identical for a reason. And so we were always switching, like, all right, whoever's going to get rolled up, they take the backpack with the least amount of stuff in it. So I had the BGAN. Took out the BGANs. I had I had the BGAN. I had the tough book. I had like all the good stuff. But he had a PLB. And as he related it to me, the questions began, right? Like, what were you doing in Saudi?
For context, is he also a white male?
He's white male, 6'2", 245, blonde hair, blue eyes.
Okay, got it. Good to
know. Yeah.
Okay.
We both had quite short military cuts. So I'll backtrack for a second. The prior border was Syria and Daraa, and after I was rolled up there, the last question they asked before they stamped, or after they stamped actually, was, how many more are coming?
Wow.
Right. So we were just here to observe and understand. That was our go-to line. Um, but the the Israelis just could not fathom that we'd be hanging out and have friends in Saudi, Jordan, and Syria. You're Americans. How can that be? How many trips have you made here? First one. Who did you see? Who did you talk to? What did you do? I mean, they gave him not just the interrogating business, but every item remaining in his pack. So I mentioned Yanbu. That's in Saudi on the Red Sea. It was a temporary military base of T.E. Lawrence, and we were fortunate enough to get a tour of it when they were restoring it, and we were fortunate enough to be presented a simple ceramic tile, um, which may have been walked on by T.E. Lawrence. We like to imagine that. So we don't really have carry-on capability, or we're carry-ons. We don't have the ability to ship this home or check it. So we break up the tile, knowing that we'll assemble it later when we get back home, and we put it in our packs. Funny thing is, kind of looks like Cemex explosive.
Yeah, they don't really love that.
And when they got to
They
that,
probably didn't like that explanation.
Wells had a great story and like sounds lyrical and good, but
But trust me, it's
you
the
know,
truth. Wow. Okay. So, and just for the context for the audience, this is '07. This was
oh 06.
'06.
Yeah.
And the war on terror is going on at this point. So
Oh yeah.
talk to me about
Iraq is still hot. Syria's about to go into Civil War version 1. Saudi's on edge because their guys were the ones that started it all. Jordan's just like, oh god, tough neighborhood. Oh yeah, hosting a million Palestinians in tents, and Israel is Israel.
well, what's the Israel Saudi relationship like at that point? Like,
N-
can you
non
can you pull out
non-existent.
your phone with the chief of staff at that point and have any sort of
um, we had no way to cut a break
yeah,
in Israel with anybody.
yeah, okay.
But just we had no roof, we had no pool, we just had to power through. So all our experience were
What
liabilities.
was going through your mind at the time? Like, was that it doesn't again, as you recap this story, I don't really sense that there was a lot of fear throughout this trip. You sound very composed. Again, it takes a certain kind of person to put themselves in the situation to begin with. So I imagine that composure was always part of your acumen. But was this the point, or was there any point where you were more scared, for lack of a better word?
Yeah, the IDF has a nasty little machine gun called uh, um, taser. If I have it correct, it's like a bullpup semi-automatic, and we're in the bus with all other Palestinians that are making the crossing from Jordan to Israel, and I'm used to like New York City buses. They come, they go, they're on schedule. That's it, right? Not so much. Um, Wells and I are trying to position ourselves in a spot on the bus that is closest to an emergency exit midway through the bus, standing. Just cheek to jowl. It's so tight. But if anything happened to that bus, and a lot of those buses, things happen. We didn't have a lot of means of emergency egress. We didn't have a chance in hell. And we sat in the noonday sun for an hour and a half in that bus, no AC, with capacity 40, probably 65 people in the bus, and the machine guns outside. Um, I felt totally powerless, hopeless, trapped, but it was the only way. You don't walk up to that border. It was the only way to get there. And then, ironically, when we got there, I kind of had this feeling like, hey, like it's Israel now.
Yeah, like
Like it
they're
could
our
be
friends.
Jericho, New York,
Yeah.
right? Like where's the bagels and cream cheese? And and couldn't be further from the truth. It was tough. It was defensive. It was uh, complete to a proctological degree, um, and that's just how they roll. Tough neighborhood.
I I I'm struggling to ask this next question. When you look back on that experience, right? And you think about how you were able to find a little bit of humanity as you trek through Saudi Arabia and other areas of the Middle East, and then you think about your experience at the Israeli border, was there anyone there who treated you like a person at any point? Or, were you not able to kind of, dig into the human side of why they're treating you this way?
I'll go with this answer. Thank you for thinking about how to pose the question. Uh, they were consummate professionals, where the other borders were just the lowest guys on the totem pole,
Fair.
right? Just wanted to go home to their families.
Yeah.
And it's like, here's these dudes rolling up. They look like something, but I'm just about on break. And like, if I detain them and they're important, I'm in trouble. If I let them through and they're trouble, then I'm gonna get a call from an important person. So like, just let me out of this, please. So they were dear but not professional. My take on Israel, and I have great respect for it. It's like consummate professionals. But in so being, you got the feeling there was no freelance. They were under orders and there was a book to follow. So this came
From the top.
from the top,
Yeah.
and that's just how they roll.
Yeah.
And in a way, they're more predictable than the dude at the
Yeah.
Syrian border at Darat, which could have gone either way.
Got it. Okay. No, I mean, look, that's really, really helpful context for us, to kind of soak in here. You're right. I mean, that's a really, really good call out. At the end of the day, regardless of how charming you were as an American, I don't think there was going to be a single person at the Israeli border who's going to bend for you because they had protocol. Uh,
Affinity did not uh,
it didn't matter who you knew.
hold a card there. No.
And then that's a really interesting thing to reflect on. You had called out the moment when you came to the realization of the overlapping prophets between the three religions, and how that was a transformative moment for you throughout the journey, and kind of allowed you to really think deep within. I imagine there were several other moments like that throughout the journey. As things kind of finished off, as you approach the 26-day mark now, what was the overwhelming thought in your head? Was it like, holy crap, we just did this? Or was it, there's so much work to be done? And, you know, now that we've done this, we have to carry forth this mission and, perhaps come back and do more work.
Well, we woke up on the 25th day at the King David Hotel in Jerusalem. And we were beyond exhausted, but we were in Jerusalem. And so we had to rally. So there was, holy cow, we've just done this. But there was also another existential experience where Wells and I, as Christians, got to see Jerusalem. We were warned by the concierge that there were quarters in Jerusalem that were safer than others. And then she saw our passport and she said, all good. But we went to the Wailing Wall, observed services there. There was a small wedding there. We took a little stairway, and in 5 minutes, we're in front of the Al Aqsa Mosque, right? Um, Surprisingly, got grilled by IDF because we were Christians wanting to enter into a mosque that was in Israeli territory. They were having a hard time understanding that. If they knew how many mosques we had been in the last 26 days, they might have cut us a break. We went to the Garden of Gethsemane, where Jesus asked for a break from the Lord. It's like, come on, me. And that was mystical. And they have trees there. They're probably not 2,000 years old, but they look like it. And what was amazing is that this entire trip took 20 minutes on foot. All three religions covered, right? Which reminded me how close all of these people have been living together for thousands of years. And look, we were there to meet some folks from a charity called Seeds of Peace. These are both Israelis and Palestinians that go away to summer camp in Maine to work conflict resolution together. And they've been doing this for 30 years. So there are kids that have been educated on this for 30 years, and now they're back in Israel and Palestine and other conflict countries. So, we're there with them. There's a Muslim who's Israeli who can't go to Mecca because he has an Israeli passport. Like, right. And there are it is an incredible mixing pot, and Jerusalem is the center of it all. And we had a wonderful and enlightening day there.
Wow. I can't even imagine. I can't even imagine what must have been running through your mind, and just the endorphins and all the energy. And
Well, you don't have to imagine. You can actually turn to chapter 13 of the book or spin forward in the Audible, which is by Eduardo Ballerini, and listen to it, because our experience in Jerusalem was I consider it to be the most important chapter of the book.
I can see that. I can understand that. Um, Especially given your own faith and the journey that you were on, to see the intersection of different faiths, and then kind of especially what things like Gethsemane represent, from a deeper meaning perspective, and how it could really shape perspective around everything that you had seen in a world that, when you consider, the overall overarching theme of Christianity, doesn't really matter, you know? So it clashes in so many ways, and really brings you probably to the highest level of spirituality and inner thought, which, as I think about it, is probably the perfect way to end the journey through the region. And as a result of that, it makes my job today very difficult in asking you a closing question to this, because I can't imagine a more perfect ending to the journey. But I will ask you one closing question as we wrap things up here. This journey was about 20 years ago, and a lot has happened since that time across regions, right? And a lot of us, again, read headlines. Take this back to 2001. We were all just reading headlines. None of us took action. Majority of us did not take action. And a lot of times the people who even took action were not necessarily willing to go to the front lines and fully understand perspectives. Even, when you think about stateside, a lot of people attend rallies, attend protests, um, you know, eh, not necessarily because they get the perspective from the boots on the ground, but because maybe they're standing up for something, that bothers them within. Um, as you reflect and you look at what's going on in the world today, are you frustrated? Are you angry? Do you feel like, given what you've seen throughout your own journey and through the work that you've done, that a different path could have been taken? I'm
Look,
gonna ask, it's
in
a
the
very
end,
complicated, heavy question, and there is no answer. So, please answer this however you feel most comfortable.
well, first of all, um, in my sixth decade, I've come to realize that I don't control much of the universe. And there are precious few things that I can actually do within my control. And that is what I focus on. And so, I guess to wrap this and put a button on it, I'm a curious kid from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, that had the courage, together with Wells, to go on a journey of understanding. Look, Wells has been to dozens of 15,000, 20,000 foot peaks as well. I've had 500 dives. Been, personal best. Okay, great. I ran the marathon here. Or that we wanted to bring back understanding so that someone like me, sitting somewhere in America, perhaps the Midwest, might read the book or listen to the audible and say, like, holy shit, I did not know that. And that ignorance that I had melted away. And I have a better understanding of the people and the religions and the culture. And so that is something that was within our control. And that's why we wrote the book. And I'm just glad that people like you have reached out and allowed us to tell our story and share it with your audience.
Thank you, Miles. I really appreciate that, and that was, such a perfect answer in the context of a lot of the themes that go with Mile 40, especially understanding that at the end of the day, the controllables are what we can maintain, right? And we do our best to lighten up the world around us through our own experience. In your case, driven by curiosity, which is a key tenor to a lot of humanity's successes. And your journey speaks quite clearly to that. And so, to the listeners out there, I highly encourage you to pick up a copy, A Line in the Sand. Miles, where is it available? Is it just on Amazon, or is there anywhere else that you want to drive them to?
We're all team Amazon, Audible, print, and Kindle.
Amazing.
That's where to go.
Perfect. Miles, thank you again for the time, the vulnerability, the openness, the wisdom that you've shared with us today.
Truly a pleasure. Thank you, Bishoy.
You got it.